to the Global View podcast. Today we'll explore clean water accessibility with an exclusive interview with Hannah Matthews, a water programs senior manager at Charity Water. So to start off, could you please introduce yourself and feel free to include information about your background and role?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. My name is Hannah Matthews, and I am a water program senior manager at Charity Water. So Charity Water is a organization whose mission is to end the global water crisis. And the way that we define the water crisis is that there are 703 million people around the world who do not have basic access to drinking water. And basic access means that these folks don't have access to a clean, drinkable water source within 30 minutes round trip collection time of their home. And so both the water is not safe to drink and also it is very far away from where they make their homes. And so Charity Water is an organization that fundraises from a diverse audience of really generous donors across the US and also abroad. And we deploy that fundraising money to local organizations who are based in a number of countries around the world who implement clean water projects on our behalf and on behalf of the communities that they hope to serve. And so my job as a programs manager is to interact with those local implementing partners and maintain those relationships, go and monitor the work, visit those partners, and make sure that projects are advancing as we expect and help those partners plan for the future.
So, in what ways does access to clean water transform a community? And are there any specific examples that come to mind?
So at Charity Water, we say that clean water changes everything. And that's actually why I chose to work in the water, sanitation, and hygiene sectors, because I believe that water is kind of a catalyst for all kinds of other forms of development. If you think it's important for kids to be able to go to school, they can't be spending hours collecting water if that water is a long trip from their homes. If you want to focus on health, it's really hard to focus on health if people are drinking contaminated drinking water. That means that they're managing diarrheal disease, they're managing all of these things that come from drinking water. And so for me, I think water is like the basis. And I think a lot of folks would agree it's kind of the basis of lots of different kind of avenues of development and advancement for folks. And so, I think that specifically, I've heard so many examples talking to people about how water transforms their community, transforms their lives. But one that has really stuck with me ever since I heard it, I was on a visit to one of our partners in Tanzania, and um, I was speaking with some women who were talking about, what life was like before they had a water system implemented in their community. And one woman was telling me that they used to have to walk because they didn't have a water source nearby. They used to have to walk, I think it was like 5 kilometers to, which is about 3 miles, to a community that did have a well or a borehole, which is what we sometimes call it. And people used to come from so many surrounding communities to that one borehole because it was the only source in the area, especially during the dry season when you couldn't just easily collect water from a stream or something like that. And because the line would get so long in the mornings when people typically collect water, they would actually have to go overnight and they would have to get online at the borehole at like 3 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning, and they would actually sleep overnight in line to make sure that they would be able to collect water as soon as the caretaker came and opened up the borehole. And so as you can imagine, this is like, first of all, it's dangerous to be like sleeping outdoors in line at a water source, but it also created all of this conflict with their families because they were, out at all hours of the night. Sometimes they wouldn't make it back in time to make breakfast for their kids or their husbands or their families. And we know that water collection is mainly a women's responsibility. And so this is something that caused a lot of tension in marriages and families. And now that the women had access to a water system in their community, they no longer had to do that. They didn't have to spend nights outside of their home. It relieved a lot of conflict with their families, with their partners. It meant that they had a lot more time as well. They were just around home more often, and so they could, expand their gardening plots. They could actually have livestock that they could actually watch over because they weren't away so often. And so is of course transformational in terms of like economic ability because you have all this extra time to commit to economic activities, but also in those interpersonal relationships as well, and that like safety and security at home and in family, that I think is some of perhaps the less visible but no less important impact of clean water on communities and particularly on women.
So, what methods do you use to identify the areas that require the most aid? Are there any specific strategies that you employ?
Yeah, so we do have a methodology by which we choose, in particular, the countries where we choose to work. And so we start off and we look at the countries that have the lowest rates of water access. And so it's where most of those 703 million people who don't currently have water access, where they currently live. And we look at the countries where those folks are concentrated, mostly in rural areas, because that's where Charity Water focuses most of our efforts, are folks in rural areas that don't have access to water. And that's because 8 out of 10 people in the world who currently live without access to clean water, they live in rural areas. And so that's the crisis that we are working to solve. Certainly, there are also urban areas. There's major problems in big cities as well. But we believe that it's important to focus, and so we focus on the rural areas. So once we've sort of identified the countries where the need is the highest, then we look for, in that group, we look specifically to the countries that are low and lower middle income countries per the World Bank. And that's because essentially these are the countries whose economy just is not at the level at which they can like reasonably solve this problem themselves, that outside aid is an important factor in solving this problem. Then we remove any countries that are active conflict zones. It's not because that we don't think that emergency relief is important, but emergency relief is very different from long-term development, and the context is different, the countries are different, the dynamics are different. There are organizations who work in emergency zones. We personally work in mostly non-conflict zones. So once you've kind of identified those countries, we then have a portfolio of countries that we support work in. We then go and we look for excellent local partners because, like I said earlier, we are primarily a fundraising organization. We're an oversight organization, and we provide funding to local organizations who actually implement the work, who go out and design water systems, who drill wells, who do all of that work on the ground, train communities, all of those steps. And so we have to go out and look for excellent local partners, and we vet them. We make sure that they meet our standards. We make sure that the quality of the work is high, that they align with our values as an organization. And so once we can find those really excellent local partners with really good expertise, then they sort of dictate from there what regions of the country have the most need, what are the best communities to work in. Those are all decisions that are made by our local partners who are the closest to the ground and who are the closest to the problem. And so I think that's sort of our two-pronged approach is we go as far as the country, and then our local partners kind of take the next steps from there to decide what the areas of highest need are and where they think they can create the most impact and lasting impact.
So, can you tell me about Charity Water's active water programs?
Yeah, so we are currently funding over, I think we're getting close to 60 now, different local partners in countries across the world. Our portfolio currently includes 22 countries that we have partners working in, and those countries are in sub-Saharan Africa as well as South and Southeast Asia. So programs ranging from, we have one partner that's doing really complex piped water systems, bringing water right to the doorstep of households in Senegal and West Africa, to programs in East Africa. I spoke about Tanzania earlier. That's personally one of the areas that I focus on, that focuses more on wells and maybe some piped systems with public access points. And then we also have programs in South and Southeast Asia. We have one program that we fund in Cambodia that focuses on water filters. A lot of places in Southeast Asia have high levels of access to water. There's lots of water all around. You think about Cambodia, you think of mountains and rainforests. So there's a lot of water, but it's not necessarily safe to drink. And so we have a partner who focuses on filtering that water that is widely available. So all kinds of different programs, lots of different contexts. And that's actually why we work with those local implementing partners, because I, as a water programs manager, I can't possibly know what the right solution is in Senegal, in Tanzania, and in Cambodia. I'm not from any of those places. And so that's why we rely on those local partners to come up with those contextualized water solutions.
So, what are your organization's long term goals? What do you hope to accomplish in the next 5 to 10 years?
Uh, I mean, our founder always says that we believe we can end the water crisis in our lifetime. That is certainly our longest term goal, is we would love to see those 703 million people who don't have basic access to water receiving basic access to water. And so I think that's like the biggest, longest term goal. But in that sort of 5 to 10 year range, we are hoping to exponentially increase our impact as an organization and trying to reach more people faster than we ever have before. Um, and we are putting a lot of thought as well into how do we support the work that we have funded historically as well to make sure that water continues to flow for years and years to come. It's one thing to provide access to clean water the first time. It's another thing to make sure that water continues to flow in the long term. And so I think those are going to be our major focuses in the next 5 to 10 years.
What is the biggest obstacle in providing clean water?
So I sort of just alluded to this in my previous answer, but I think it's that piece of long-term, what we call in the sector functionality. And so you've implemented a well or you've implemented a piped water system. Does water continue to flow and continue to provide benefit to community members for years to come? There's lots of different statistics floating around in the sector, but one that I think a lot of people kind of agree on is that probably about 25%, so 1 in 4 water sources or water points, as we call them, in sub-Saharan Africa are non-functional at any given time. And so if you can imagine like all of the wells and the pipe systems and the spring protections and all of these different technologies that have been implemented, about a quarter of them at any moment in time are actually not working. And that's a huge problem in the sector. That's, someone has gone in and constructed a water point, maybe the community themselves, maybe the local government, maybe an aid organization, whoever it is, has invested in constructing this water source, and now it's just not working. And there's a variety of reasons why that can be true. Sometimes, of course, it's reasons that are very complicated, like conflict, maybe climate change has changed the water table or something like that. But many times, actually, it's for a preventable cause that water points are not working. And so when you're operating in high need areas like we are, it also often means that you're operating in context where the governance and the market systems are still playing catch up after long periods of the country experiencing colonialism, imperialism. And so the systems that would support the long-term functionality of water infrastructure maybe aren't very well developed either. And so supply chains for spare parts or government systems that monitor the functionality of water points or well-trained mechanics that can keep things functional and that communities can rely on, or even just the financial sustainability that the community itself has. Can the community afford to pay for repairs? It's like anything, like your car, right? You have to change the oil in your car every once in a while. You got to change the tires to make sure that things keep working. A well or a pipe system is the exact same way. And so when you think about that financial investment, you also have to think about, is the community financially independent and stable enough to also invest in that? And so keeping water projects functional long term is a huge challenge. And it's something that, as I sort of noted, it's something that we as Charity Water are focusing on a lot in the years to come. We're putting money behind this. We're supporting our partners, not just to implement new water projects, but also doing maintenance and investing in the operations needs that those water projects have as well, to make sure that we're not just providing benefit once for 5 years, but that hopefully we're providing benefit for the long term.
What is Charity Water's biggest success in providing clean water?
So, I mean, I think I would be remiss not to say that we've had enormous impact already so far. The water projects that we've funded are reaching over 18 million people, which is just an enormous number. It's really hard to picture. Perhaps a little bit easier to picture is Those people are being served by over 150,000 individual water points, so individual water access points, whether that's a well, whether that's a tap, that's part of a pipe system. So we are incredibly proud of the impact that we've already been able to make through this amazing network of local partners. And I think that that's also something that's a huge success that I feel a lot of pride in is we have a brilliant network of local partners across those 22 countries who are implementing really high quality, really thoughtful work, and they're poised to scale. So as Charity Water hopefully continues to grow, continues to gather more support to our cause and to our mission, those partners are prepared to expand, to take on even more opportunity and to create more impact. And so I think the future is really bright, and I think that that is a really great success that we're so poised to move into the future and continue to tackle challenges as they come.
That was my last question, but do you have any concluding statements that you want to make?
I just want to say thank you so much. My the thing that I think about the most when it comes to philanthropy, when it comes to international development, I think it's really easy when you hear a number like, there's over 700 million people who don't have access to clean water and feel kind of overwhelmed by the whole thing. But at the end of the day, there is enormous impact that we can all make by all choosing individually to support causes that we care about. And that's the case, with an organization like Charity Water or other organizations that are doing work that you feel passionate about. And it takes lots of individual people deciding to get involved to create impact. It takes folks like me, it takes folks like you, it takes folks like all of your listeners to deciding to do something about these issues that you're really passionate about. And so I'm glad that you're asking the questions, and I encourage folks to stay engaged and to, one person at a time, try to solve some of these really big existential problems that we have in our world.
Thank you for listening to the Global View podcast. Tune in next week for another episode.